Good afternoon, planners in London. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're having a few technical issues, so we're going to try and muddle through with the software. I'd just like to welcome you all. This is the second in what we hope will be an ongoing series of RTPI London idea exchanges. So we're hoping that we can kind of in this time of crisis maybe come up with some good ideas about how we get through and what happens after the pandemic. This event was actually planned to be a face-to-face event, which obviously didn't happen, and we thought it would be interesting in light of the Building Beautiful Commission report, which came out in February, just to kind of explore what that means for planning, and particularly planning in London. And so I think we've got various questions. So, I mean, the overall question is, are we already building beautiful in London? Are we not? And what could we do to improve that? And really, are the Commission recommendations likely to make a difference? We were also expecting a planning white paper by now, which has been affected, which we thought that this would be discussing. But obviously, the findings will be coming out in that. So we've got a really great selection of panelists this afternoon. We're supposed to be starting with Dr. Riette Oosthuizen, who sits with me on the RTPI's Planning Practice and Policy Committee, who's a partner at HTA Design, working kind of in the interface between design and planning. Unfortunately, she's currently having technical issues joining, so we're going to go through that, and so we'll probably try and come back to her later. So we're going to pass initially to Sarah Cary, who I'm sure most planners in London know is the Executive Director at Enfield. Recently made the transition from private to public sector. Previously worked for developers, and is now kind of overseeing some of really interesting design-led regeneration in Enfield, particularly around Meridian Water and that Upper Lee Valley area. We've got Coby, who is an urban planner over at just outside of London. So we want to talk a bit about garden communities and that sort of, that kind of within the green belt and beyond the green belt type thing. So Coby's at Brentwood, working on the Dunton Hills garden community. So that'll give us a bit of an insight into what's happening just outside London. And then we're blessed today to have not one but two of the RTPI presidential team. So Sue Mans is the 2020 president. Again, before the disaster happened, we were supposed to be doing a tour of London today and next week, where we would have been showing Sue some of the various amazingly well-designed projects that have happened in London. I think we might need to put that off until next year, when Way will be president. So I think we'll probably do a kind of a double visit for you both next year, where we'll see some of these amazing projects. And so Way's going to kind of provide a bit of her own perspective and talk a bit about the some of the RTPI ideas, and then Sue will be joining as part of her presidential visit for the debate. So I'm going to just try and forgive the poor slickness here. I'm just going to scroll through the slides to Sarah's. Give Sarah mouse control. I think you've got it already, Sarah, and then I'm happy for you, if that's okay.
Okay. Hi. Thank you, Tom. So Tom's asked us to give us all of us, or each of us, to give about 5 minutes on London, are we building beautiful, and then we'll hear from you guys in the chat and discuss some of the kind of positions and thoughts that we all have as we go through that. I'm going to try and make the next slide go. We're going to see what happens. But it's not going. So, well, there it goes twice when you want to answer. There you go. So I thought I'd open by reminding everyone that the Commission's findings, when they talk about building beautiful, they explain that this is not just about design. It's about involving communities. It's about upstreaming planning, more specificity in allocations of sites and in designs. But it's also about long-term stewardship and more teeth for planning enforcement. On the whole, I am supportive of many of the Commission's recommendations. They build a really good and quite attractive picture of a really active and proactive role for local planning authorities, one that drives quality and good design. And I believe in London and in Enfield, we can provide some examples of how we're already doing that. But I'm sure, as many of you know this, local authorities do need additional capacity in order to be able to deliver meaningful engagement, co-design, detailed master planning, high quality design review, even things like discharge of conditions. They need a level of resource in local authorities that we don't quite have at the moment. So beauty doesn't come on a shoestring. And so I've got now a couple examples of how I think we are designing for beauty, and I'm still, it's a little bit slow when I move it, so I'm just trying to get it to move to the next slide. Give me 1 second. There we go. No, again, it's gone too far. Tom, can you move it back? Can I leave it with somebody else to move it back? That's because it's just, so thank you. And I just wanted to, first of all, talk about consultation and engagement. One of the things that the Commission said is that local councils need to radically and profoundly to reinvent the ambition, depth and breadth in which they engage with neighbourhoods and when they consult on their local plans. And I think there's a lot in this and I really love it, and I'll reference need for additional resources to do it. But I thought I'd mention two really good examples in Enfield recently. So on the left is a sort of flyer from one of our local plan consultations that we did last year. And our Reg 18 consultation, quite issues and options, but we wanted to reach thousands of residents through a variety of formats. So some online, some in person. We did a lot of language work with different language groups across the borough. And we really tried to seek the feedback of lay residents. And I guess the right way to think about this is, could someone who with no professional background in the built environment spend about 20 minutes understanding what the local plan is all about, and can you in 20 minutes give them to a place where they feel like they can make some comments and have some stewardship over the outcome? And we tried to do that, and I think we were pretty successful at it. We had a huge amount of feedback from a very wide range of people across the borough, which was great. And on the right hand side is our recently adopted heritage strategy, which was all about using heritage to make the future of Enfield. And in particular, we wanted to mention the way we launched this strategy with a live music event with local singers and local poets. We really celebrated existing heritage and looked to the future. And it was just a really nice way of saying planning doesn't always have to be about writing documents. It can be about having a poetry recital, and that can be a great part of celebrating planning. Can someone go to the next slide? Because the next thing I wanted to talk about was an example of our approach to estate regeneration at the Snails and Joyce estate. And in this case, we're still at the early stages of estate regen. We've really embraced the ballot. We're not quite there yet, and it's been paused because of the pandemic, because we can't do proper meaningful engagement. And we're putting together a really good housing offer, but we're also working really closely with our design panel, our third-party design panel, on making sure we've got the redesign of the new estate right, on proportion, on exclosure, on how you do the patterns of streets and squares and landscape. Many of the problems that face the estates, because there's two of them actually, and are really negatively impacting on residents, are down to bad design. There's the spaces which have no frontages and no uses, and therefore they end up being magnets for people who are up to no good. Although in this example, these children are clearly up to some good. But it gives you it's a classic panel system in like open grass, which doesn't lead to any sense of urban enclosure or kind of ownership of a space. So in our new design, we're being very careful about our attention to sunlight and daylight as well. And the purpose of those green spaces, what exactly are they for and how will they be used? And just to reinforce on this, that we're still in early stages, but we've had 3 or 4 sessions now with our design review panel, and they've been provided a really good check and challenge for us, even on our own schemes. The next slide, can you hand over? Can you put it on to the next slide? I'm sorry. Thanks. I just because the Commission also talks about landscape and stewardship, I thought I'd just mention the fact that we're just in the middle of agreeing our climate action plan at Enfield, and a really good example here of how we're using landscape in a bigger sense and using planning in a long-term sense to think about benefiting the borough. So we're looking at quite substantial tree planting and rewilding proposals in the northern bit of the borough. So this is building on our heritage and investing in landscape. It's not in a way which is going to be great for residents as well. And so my last slide, if you can just go on to the next one, I'd appreciate that, is just a little bit of a comment about beauty and a pandemic and what we're facing at the moment. So things that I think we're all going to be thinking about, all be talking about space standards for homes, including amenity space, but also in permitted development. It's something which is well known in the industry, but I think we should be using this crisis to really force that position that we need quality space standards in housing and we need amenity standards in housing. And then the second thing that I've been thinking about a lot is about how planning can move quickly to help our town centres and to encourage investment. And we're looking at things like emergency master plans or how we can better use local development orders. To make these work, we're going to need, like, in an emergency situation, and to really help our town centres respond, we're going to have to consolidate, maybe not reduce, but consolidate consultation. And we're going to have to accept that they may not be in conformance with our local plan. So some things that we're just trying to work through in that, but it's an idea I wanted to bring here. So thanks, Tom. That's me on all of that.
Thank you, Sarah. And a message to the entire audience I was meant to be sent to Riette, who is here but can't hear. So I think we'll keep persevering and hopefully bring her in later. But it might be that we need to do this event again in a few weeks' time. Okay, so that was wonderful. Thanks, Sarah. So Coby is here, but I don't think the webcam's working. Is that right, Coby?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm just going to hand you mouse control. Again, I might need to go through, but if you want to try it and then let's go there.
That works. Okay. I think we've got this. So I'm sorry you can't see me today. I've been put on makeup for you all, so I'm sorry about that. But I'm Coby Tomlins. I'm the project lead for Dunton Hills Garden Village within Brentwood Borough Council. So I'll go over what building beautiful means in relation to garden communities, and I'll use Dunton Hills as a case study and show what we're trying to do to implement building beautiful at our garden community. Oh, didn't work. Oh, I don't think it's working. Oh, no, it has worked. Okay, I might get you to drive, Tom, if that's okay. I'll just tell you when to next the slide.
I'll be ready. And
yeah, okay, great. So just quickly, as you'll probably know, I just thought I'd go over what is building beautiful. So in December 2018, central government set up building better and building beautiful. It's a bit of a mouthful. So this looked at improving beauty in the delivery of new homes and neighbourhoods. And within that, there's a large focus on large-scale new build development. So garden communities in this country obviously make up a large proportion of that delivery. There's now 34 garden communities across the country. But I really think the key takeaway from the Building Beautiful Commission is that it's not just about pretty buildings and what they look like. It's much more than that. All right, well, next slide. Thank you. Thanks. So just a bit of a background. What is a garden community? You probably already know. It was coined in 1898 by Ebenezer Howard. And it was the notion to sort of get out of the city and get to somewhere more beautiful with lots of open space and trees, and people were the focus. However, you can see sort of in the middle slides here, we seem to have lost that notion along the way. We moved to a more car-focused and homogenous development type with not really any mix, and people, I guess, weren't really the focus. This isn't just seen in the UK. I mean, you might have picked up from my accent, but I'm Australian. So the picture down the bottom, that's of a new build development in just outside of Sydney. It's not really what, when you go to university as a planner, it's not really what you envisage building. So I think as a garden community, we have a real opportunity here to build a 21st century garden community. I think we've realized this isn't what we want, what we're building now. So let's make them sustainable, well-connected, and self-sufficient. So you can see here the TCPA, they've brought in a number of different principles about what building beautiful means. I think that's really important as we start to deliver some of those. All right, if we next the slide. All right, so I'll go into Dunton Hills, and how we're trying to build beautiful. So just for context, we're on the edge of London, as Tom said. We're within Essex, right on the edge. So we bought a Havering, which is a London borough. We're along the C2C line and 34 minutes to central London. So we're in the south of the borough. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. Yeah, thanks, Tom. Dunton Hills Garden Village. All right, so if we next the slide. All right, so this is just a broad overview. It's a development for up to 4,000 homes. It's made up of 3 neighbourhoods. So we've got Dunton Fans, Dunton Woods, and Dunton Waters. We're currently at the design stage and we have a framework master plan. So we broadly know the structure of the community. But I think the key thing for our garden community, something we're really proud of, is that it's community-led, it's landscape-led, and it's self-sustaining. So something we're really keen on is getting back to basic planning principles. So people are within 20 minutes of everything that they need. Large open spaces are prevalent. You know, we've got enough open space that is the size of equivalent of a country park. And the buildings really fit in around the landscape and not the other way around, which is typically what we've seen in the past, I think. All right, so if we next the slide. All right, so how we're enforcing that at Dunton Hills. I think this is really important to enforce building beautiful. I don't think we can, personally, I don't think we can just leave it up to the development industry. I think it takes a joint effort. So we're enforcing it in our policy framework. So talking to other garden communities as well and learning from our past, I think it's imperative that it's in our design framework. So at Dunton Hills, right from our local plan where we've embedded our TCPA principles through to our design codes, building beautiful is throughout all stages of the planning process. Next the slide. So all throughout our policies, we've ingrained this through 5 key themes. So as you can see, it's a strong sense of place, landscape, sustainable transport, a forward-thinking village, which includes innovation and sustainability, and design. So I think this really highlights that building beautiful isn't just about design. That's one part of it, but it's about how all of them come together to create a beautiful place. So how our environment interacts with our built environment. It's about sustainability, connections, and most importantly, the people that live there. I think it's really important, as Sarah touched on before, that they have a say on what is built and how it's managed and how it's owned into the future. So that's something that we're looking at currently at Dunton Hills at the moment. I think people know best how they want to live in that community. And as I said before, I think it's highlighted more now than ever that people should have a say in where they live. You know, we're at home so much, and I think COVID and what we're in at the moment has highlighted that even more. All right, so at Brentwood, oh, sorry, if we can next the slide. Yeah, so I'll touch on some of the engagement techniques as well that we're using. So we've done this from the outset, being at the policy stage. We're lucky enough for a strategic development that we can do this from the start. So we've been able to engage our community right from the outset. So we have a youth program where we engage our younger children. When you think about it, over a 20-year development, these people are likely to buy our homes of the future. They've had some pretty cool ideas. Tree houses for one. We have a community forum and we also continue to engage with our minority groups. We're also about to embark on our detailed design of the projects. We've now, with this pandemic on our hands, we've taken the opportunity to take that online. I don't necessarily think that just because we can't meet in person, we can't reach out to a number of different community groups, both through online mechanisms, but also posts and things like that. So we've got surveys, Q&A sessions, online workshops, some meetings, interactive mapping, and my favorite, some homework tasks for the kids. I'm sure the parents will appreciate that with their homeschooling at the moment. So I think if we next the slide. Yeah, so I think just the key takeaway is building beautiful is more important than just how places look, especially in garden communities. It's about how people come together, they're connected in a sustainable and healthy community. And that's more important now than ever. So I guess watch this space at Dunton Hills, and hopefully we can build a genuinely beautiful community.
Wonderful, thank you, Coby. And I'm sure we'll try and get back to some of that in the Q&A at the end. Riette, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. That's
good. Excellent. I've had a very temperamental start to this.
Yeah. Right. I'm gonna hand over to Wei, and then we'll come back to you if that's okay. Great. At least we're all on board now. And just to say, we were hoping to have it a bit more interactive, but unfortunately the software doesn't allow us. So we've got people asking questions, and we do have this chat bar, but apparently not everyone can see it. So we'll try and respond to some as we go through. I think we might do a write-up afterwards, which starts bringing this through. So I'm going to hand over to Wei to talk through your slides. Is it working? Hang on, here we go. Seems to. That working? Right?
Yeah. Okay. Yes,
yeah,
working
okay.
well. Okay, thanks, Tom. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Wei Yang, Vice President of the RTPI. I'm really delighted to be invited to join this discussion. During the COVID-19 outbreak, the routines of our lives were suddenly changed. I used to commute to London, central London every day to my office, but now I haven't been to central London for almost 2 months. Less notable things before, like corner shops, local parks, even nice views from our windows, now become very important in our lockdown time. As a town planner, and of course, I'm also a member of the public, I observe my life more in detail than any time I ever did before. The things worked and didn't work keep me reminded of the purpose of our profession. It's about people's health and well-being. For example, we all know exposure to trees, the sky, and the bird song in cities improves mental well-being. In the current lockdown period, we realized how crucial it is for people with mental health issues and learning difficulties to have local access to their green spaces. I believe the fundamental objective of the planning profession is to create a balanced system for people, nature, and the society to coexist in harmony. But in order to create this balanced system, we need to make a good connection between abstract plan making and the spatial placemaking. I think that's one of the key roles for planners. As a town planner and also an urban designer, I'm encouraged by the integrated approach and the joined-up thinking the Building Better and Building Beautiful Commission report has articulated. My favorite sentence in this report is planning officers represent the community on whose behalf they negotiate with the landowner and the developer. I think this is a very important fact, but often overlooked by the general public and the media. So I really want to quote some of our pioneers' thinkings. Sorry, this is just keep jumping too quick. Go back one page, yes. I think these pioneers, they founded our profession. They have social justice and a long-term vision of communities in their heart. So if I may quote from Sir Raymond and Wynne, I won't read this all because I think you can read it by yourself. Raymond and Wynne and Octavia Hill, which I will quote later, they had both campaigned the importance of beauty, engaging communities, and accessible open spaces for all. So more than 100 years ago, they took the lead to change the world they lived into a better place. So a century later, we are still benefiting from it. When our pioneers built garden cities and garden communities, they envisaged that the whole country's communities would be built in that quality. However, it's really a shame that after more than 100 years later, we still have to explain and define these principles in our work. The current COVID-19 pandemic shows an unbalanced impact in different parts of our society, but this crisis also brought a very strong community spirit across the country and the world. So as planners, I think we should capture this community spirit and take the lead to address the most pressing issues in our society. I think this is a very unique opportunity presented to us. Today's subject, we are talking about, are we building beautiful in London? I believe the scope of beauty is beyond the physical beauty and should include spiritual beauty. So often I visit a place in London, even there is nothing special, very physically spectacular. I'm always touched by the place's spirit, its diversity and a strong sense of identity. I believe these qualities make London so unique. Last summer, the Mayor of London published the Handbook on Supporting Diversity, which is directly focused on the built environment sector. In February, I had the honor to represent the RTPI to attend the first roundtable meeting in the GLA with other built environment professional bodies. I believe there's a huge opportunity and potential for us to strengthen our connection with the public and be a diverse and representative profession of our community. Only in this way we can fully reflect London community's diverse needs in our plan-making role, and also become effective facilitators to enable communities in shaping beautiful places in our place-making role. I hope in 100 years' time, future Londoners will directly benefit from our work today, and the future planners will feel proud of what we have achieved. So this is just some of my thoughts reflected from the COVID-19 lockdown. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Wei. And it is quite, I'm just going to try and go back now. It is quite interesting that a lot of what's in the Building Beautiful report isn't necessarily about beauty. It's actually mainly about kind of everything that planning does. And actually,
Yes.
I read it, it's a lot of the, the origins of planning, what we should be doing as planners kind of really shines through, and it's about kind of bringing a lot of things together. Right, Riette, hopefully this works. I'm just going to try and get it on full screen again. Okay, back to what was meant to be the first presentation. I'm just sharing them now.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Can you actually hear me? Just to make sure
Yes.
you can. Okay, great.
Thank
you very much for inviting me today. I think it's really exciting as planners to be able to speak about design and beauty, because I think it's something as a group of professionals that we don't speak about often enough. And of course, there is a little bit of a tendency to leave it to the people who are seen to deal with that particular subject very much. But we are absolutely critical in creating a broad definition amongst many people of what beauty might be. Now, I work for HTA Design, so we are a multidisciplinary design practice specializing in housing and regeneration. Sorry, I have a 7-year-old participant just here. She's dressed in a tiger uniform. I'm really sorry about that.
That's good. The future planner, maybe.
I'm sorry. I live and breathe what design is on a daily basis, and I can attest to the fact that in the company I work with, there might be 220 different definitions of what good design or beauty might be in a specific instance. Oh, I'm not sure my button is working. Oh, thank you. Can you go to the next slide, Tom, if you're controlling it? Okay. So planning is, of course, changing all the time. Sorry, I just need to tie in a tiger tail. Sorry. Sorry. Planning is, of course, changing all the time, and this is jumping around quite a lot. I thought it's useful just to look at the precursor of the planning, long-awaited planning white paper, Planning for the Future, that was published very recently. And the main themes in here feature very heavily on the delivery of homes and beautiful places, beautiful, sustainable places, affordable, green, and beautiful homes. So us as planners are going to have to deal with this concept of beauty a lot more in coming years. So around the particular theme of beautiful, sustainable places, there are 3 particular announcements that is key to us. So first of all, the NPPF will be revised again to thoroughly embed the principles of good design and placemaking, and the government will define what is expected of local authorities and developers to support the creation of beautiful places. Secondly, and interestingly enough, in a very long report, such as the BBBC Commission of 190 pages, one particular topic pulled out of there is tree-lined streets at the center of future plans. And then I think the third theme is quite interesting, because I think this represents a tension that I'm very curious to see how it will play out, and that is the balance between actually local residents deciding what beauty might be in a specific context, as compared to the government's forthcoming National Model Design Code. And none of us really know what that might hold in terms of its contents. This is in, Tom, have you been, this is just, right. So these are really the key points that I want to make, and there's a lot around terminology here, and there's also a number of tools for us as planners to use and that we have to think about. So first of all, beauty and who is the beholder. So the Building Beautiful Commission report places much wider emphasis. Beauty is not about appearance only, it's defined in an incredibly wide way, and I'm not sure it makes it any more tangible to any of us, but it refers to beautiful homes, beautiful places, beautifully placed. I think who sets the vision of what beauty is, and leadership in particular is very important, and I wonder if there's an element in this in the wider definition of beauty, even whilst we allow people to play this very important role that they need to play in defining beauty, that is also non-negotiable. And I think those are elements that we are starting to learn now about the impact of COVID-19. And I wonder about space standards in particular, which of course, even though there's a national space standard, it is not mandatory for a lot of local authorities out there to adopt these. We are also in the midst of a climate crisis. So I think there are certain non-negotiable points that relate to what beautiful design is, and as we refer to healthy places as well. So we quite often see the words high quality, well designed, but what do they really mean? And do any of us really know when we have achieved that? And how is success measured and over what term? So a lot of the tools out there, for example, Building for Life, which is used quite widely, actually only relates to a scheme at conceptual stage. It doesn't actually what happens once it's actually been built and what people think about it after they've lived there for a number of years. I think the whole concept of character is incredibly key. So in the Building Beautiful Commission's definition of ugliness, it specifically relates to something that's not relating to local context. But what we should not forget is that the NPPF actually allows local authorities also to decide if they want to change the context in a local area. And I think this is quite often forgotten about, and I see this in recent appeal decisions, that quite often new designs that might be slightly challenging might actually be refused on the basis that it doesn't fit in with existing context. Now, we can't always assume that existing context, depending on what it is, of course, have to stay exactly like it is. So I think this is something for us to think about. For some reason, there's a huge delay in my slides. Okay, so I thought it's just useful to refer, many of you would have seen a national housing audit in January published a report looking at 142 schemes across England and actually finding that the majority of those are mediocre. And they've also included a whole list of different areas where they suggested where we're actually doing well and where we're not doing well. Now, the majority of areas, my next slide is not coming up. So there you go. So I think this is actually quite depressing to look at areas we're doing well in and areas we're not doing well in. One area where we're doing well is we have successfully mainstreamed secure by design. I think that's not a major achievement, really. Variety of housing types, that's being done well. I think that only referred really are there 1, 2, 3, and 4 bed units in schemes. Where we start looking at placemaking, where we actually introduced a variety of house types to actually accommodate a very diverse population and also to provide for intergenerational housing, there we're completely failing. And actually in a number of other areas, and here the majority of really important ones, the character, sense of place, walkability, environmental impact are still completely failing. So this is a report by Ipsos Mori that's been done in 2012, and I think it's just really important in the current environment in which we all live and work. It actually looked at what people really would like to see in their homes, and a number of these things I think are really important for us to think about when we are going to design in future, if we are ever going to experience a crisis like COVID-19 again. So large windows for natural light, a large main living area for eating and socializing, a layout which take into account technology, space for time away from other members of the household. Tom, I think you've been moving my slides along, so if you can move it to the next one. Other areas that this is featured on quite heavily is enough space for storage, enough storage for short-term and long-term functional items, options for different layouts, and the ability to have access to private space outside or access to green public space. You moved on to the next slide, sorry. I've already referred to this, and I think it's been referred to in all the other presentations as well. So Beauty in this report has an incredibly wide definition, and I've already made the point it doesn't particularly help us to make it tangible. Our cleaners, buildings that are unadaptable, unhealthy, unsightly, and violate the context. I think that's quite a packed sentence, and for us as planners, quite important to think about that. Unadaptable, unhealthy is unacceptable. I think we sort of know what that might mean, but unsightly, opinion different about that. And violating the context, I think I've already made the point that context sometimes can and should change. It's not like context is always something that should be preserved in its entirety. We can move on to the next slide. Right, so what tools are out there to achieve these points that sometimes that we refer to high quality, well designed? So there's Building for Life that I've already made reference to, and Tom, you can move on to the next slide. So Building for Life has 3 categories and 12 questions, but as I've said before, it only assesses schemes at conceptual stage. So the government has published its own national design guide, and I think this is something that local authorities in particular are only starting to grapple with now, and it would be quite interesting to see how that has actually helped them to start defining what this concept of well designed might mean. It's a far wider concept to deal with 10 different criteria. And certainly this is something that we now use when we do design guidance for clients. So the NPPF for some time and already, and also the London Plan, encourages local authorities to make use of design guidance and design codes and design review panels. And I think the much wider use of design codes is really still to test whether that is going to achieve us to achieve the beauty or better design. Design review panels, I think it needs to be approached with a health warning. I have experienced design review panels that have worked exceptionally well if they chaired very well. But just as I've said, I work in a practice with about 160 architects, and you can get very, very different opinions. What my worry is that design review panels are not the panacea, and what we see are that planning committees refer to the opinions of design review panels to sign the quality of schemes off, whereas it should just be a tool amongst the complete range of considerations that we should and can take into account to actually come to that much more consensual approach of have we achieved good design. Right, Tom, if you can just move it on again. So the future, these are just some of my views about where we're going from here. How if we're not doing that great in actually achieving beauty at the moment, how are we going to make sure that we do it? So one particular thing that I think is really key for us to look at is the way that value is defined. So we can't allow an approach of the highest bid for land to continue, because we're not going to achieve beauty in its wider sense of actually accommodating people's health and well-being. And this is really, there's much more debates now about social value, and I think at the procurement stage, actually public sector plays an incredibly important role. So it's not only the highest bid for land, but can we define value much wider in terms of long-term impact and outcomes, rather than just the financial bit. And of course, the influence of highways engineers is incredibly important. We have to bring planning and highway engineering together, because we can see the picture that I've put there is of if you look at the homes, they're not necessarily bad, but it's surrounded by a sea of tarmac, and that's not really going to help us to achieve beauty in the future. And my last slide, which I'm just waiting. Oh, this is not my last slide. If you could just skip to the next one. I want to just make reference. I've referred to the value of post-occupancy evaluation. I think is something that we should look in the planning system or try and encourage, because I think it's becoming increasingly important for us to understand more, and us as a practice are very concerned about actually trying to understand more about people's long-term views once they've lived in places that we have designed, and I think we can learn a lot from that. The RIBA Sustainable Outcomes Guide is a document that was published in December 2019 as a wider assessment tool for are we actually achieving well-designed places. I think it introduces a number of criteria across economic, social and environmental sustainability that are key questions that are very useful for everyone to look at in achieving better design. So I've mentioned leadership, I think, is incredibly important in going forward. Flexibility in design around COVID-19. I think there is a lot of debate at the moment trying to blame density. I don't think density is necessarily the culprit. I think we need to look at flexibility, access to green space, and the ability for people to have privacy within. So space standards, I think, are quite important. I think that was my.
Great.
I think that's my last slide.
Wonderful. Thank you. We made it. We got through in the end despite the technology. We can see Coby. It's all worked out in the end. Right, we're getting to. We've got about 15-20 minutes to go through some Q&A. We're trying to get a bit of audience participation going, so we've got a few polls that we'll try and get people to answer. Just conscious that it's difficult to get a bit the usual interaction that we would have at events like this. So I'll just try and get some questions going, and then we'll get some discussions going between the panelists. So the first one is for everyone: are we building beautiful in London? I don't know whether everyone can see this. So that's launched now. It means I've lost all the people. And maybe we could ask Sue, who hasn't presented, what her reflections are, and particularly, are there issues with the planning profession as it stands at the moment? Hello? Sorry, I seem to have lost everyone.
Hello?
I can hear you.
If I can just start before I answer the question by thanking all the presenters, because I thought all the presentations were really, really interesting and set a tremendous scene for what we're now going to sort of work our way through in terms of the questions. The one thing that jumps out to me is that people are all different in what they expect from the environment and the way we use the environment. And I think that's come out very, very strongly in terms of the current crisis that we're in. One of the biggest challenges we then have is part of the Building Beautiful is it relates to the community engagement and trying to get consensus and understanding from people in terms of what they want out of an environment and how then we take that forward, because people do have different expectations, but equally they have different abilities and different requirements. So I think that's going to be probably one of the biggest challenges. So if you take that part of Building Beautiful, are we building beautiful in terms of community engagement? I think at the moment there are some great examples in London. The previous session really highlighted the value of engagement, but we probably aren't there yet in terms of all the other schemes.
Okay, so just sharing some of the poll results there, which is basically saying that we probably do things some of the time. I think that kind of matches what you were saying, Sue. It's quite annoying because whenever I do that, I lose everyone. The next poll question, and then maybe we can. Sorry, I'm struggling with technology now. I think that there is this question around kind of the level of design guidance and particularly the idea that there could be a national design code. So I know before everything hit, Steve Quartermain in particular was kind of talking about the fact that there was going to be a national design code. Sarah, I guess asking you from a local authority perspective, and Coby, might be interesting from your perspective. Do you think a national design code would help us in London? And I'll as a poll at the same time that people can answer. Okay.
I'm overall not as enthusiastic about a national design code as probably central government is, but that's because I think that there is a lot of local character that is really varied across the UK, and actually within London as well. There are lots of different villages, effectively, and different types and characteristics of design in London, and they all work differently. And I think it's very difficult to create a national design code. That being said, if they wanted to have a national design code that restricted car access and put reductions on the amount of vehicle parking and mandated cycle lanes, then I would be all up for it. So I feel like a lot of it's a mistake to just only focus on the design of buildings when you look at beauty. And some of the standards we've got for highway engineering, for example, should be included in a design code. So
yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, I think if you keep it at a higher level with our basic principles and get back to those, I think it could work and trickle down. But I think, you know, our local authority and the people that live there know their character best. So I think, you know, you run the risk of being too strict on what the outcome is, and run the risk again of building the same thing all over the country, which is not what we want.
Okay, I'm passing the polling over to Lucy, which I think make it easier for me. So interestingly, 72% of respondent of people listening in think that we won't benefit from that in London, which is an interesting point. I think I think the next question is kind of really about at what level should we have design guidelines? And again, I think it comes in at a different level, and be interesting, Riette, what your view is as a practitioner, kind of dealing at different levels, and whether things should be, how far you need to go with guidelines, whether it's local authority level or site specific.
I think it depends on what you would like to achieve. If you would like to look at the approach to small sites delivery, I think you can do it on a borough-wide level. For example, the Croydon approach on actually almost borough-wide, having identified 4 particular areas in which infill would be allowed. You can do it there. I think, of course, sometimes you get site. It depends on how big your site is. So we are working with Coby, for example, in Dunton Hills, where we are doing the design code for that site. So this is almost the creation of a completely new, well, it's a new village for up to 4,000 homes. So yes, there a design code would definitely be of some value. I am very concerned about design codes on the level of if you go much bigger, because I think there is, to involve people do need to be involved in the creation of design coding, and I think the bigger the scale is, the more impossible it becomes to get a consensus on what there is. And I just want to make the point again about character. Because in some areas, if you look at an area with huge conservation value, then existing character is very, very important. But there are areas, particularly in London, where character can and should change. And I think, therefore, a design code, I suppose, yes, can fulfill that role, but it shouldn't be there to preserve for the sake of preservation.
Okay, Sarah, do you have any views? I mean, obviously you've worked on both sides of the fence, and kind of now in a really changing London borough. What's your view on how this could or couldn't help us?
I mean, my view is that design codes should be at a neighbourhood or like a character area or a neighbourhood level or lower to be really effective. We are developing quite a detailed design code and design guide for Meridian, but that's because for Meridian Water, which is one of the council's largest developments, that's because we want to have quality control over what happens when we work with private developers, but also when we work with our partners. We've got IKEA and Tesco who want to redevelop their area, and that is something which we want to use the planning system and use the design code approach to have a really good like care over the quality of the design that's coming forward. But I think beyond that scale, they become a little bit meaningless unless you start talking about highway engineering. So.
Yeah, great. I think another question we had, I mean, I think, you know, the Building Beautiful Commission is all very well, but it really kind of will require a lot of resourcing going forward. Do we think that local authorities and the industry in general, maybe this is a question that Wei can kick off with, do you think we've got sufficient design capability in the planning profession at the moment? Sorry, Wei, you're on mute.
Was mute by the controller.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a key issue we have to be kind of focused on is the skill capacity, and also rather than designing a lot of guidance which nobody can follow, or we need good designers to write the guidance. I think we have a huge skill capacity issue. I think there was one recommendation from the Living with Beauty report is we need some serious investment in planning service, in planners, and more broadly in the planning profession. And I think also we should encourage more interdisciplinary skills, like between highway design skills, urban design skills, and architectural design skills. It's very important to bring them all together and consider it at a strategic level. I think whether we could really make our argument use some similarities compared to the agricultural bill, because actually there was an argument about the natural capital. I think we could really make a case for social capital, the value of social capital in our planning system. So we can argue we should use public money for public goods by investing in planning. I think it's something we should really campaign for and try to get more support from the wider built environment professionals.
Riette, what's your view, I guess, coming from a private sector consultancy side? Do you think that there's enough resources in local authorities at the moment?
I think we've seen a huge improvement with the likes of public practice and actually placing young people who are really ambitious, sort of exchange system. I think that's worked really well and injected quite a lot of energy in a lot of the boroughs that we've worked with. But there is definitely need for more resources in local authorities, and this is really to strengthen that link between planning officers and design officers as well. But something else I would like to say is that I think the leadership above that is incredibly important as well, because I think it's very important to ensure that planners are empowered enough to fulfill the role that they should be fulfilling, and that is to actually bring all of these different views together and be empowered enough to play the role that the planner should do, to be the assessor of those different considerations. I don't think design should trump planning, and that sometimes, or a design viewpoint from just one or two individuals should not trump a planning officer's view necessarily. It's a process of negotiation.
Okay, I'll bring Stuart in a minute. One interesting thing, we've got another poll. I think we'll make this the last poll because it makes things go a bit funny. One of the main ways that the RTPI managed to influence, I guess, the Building Beautiful Commission was the campaign that Victoria Hills launched last year for more chief planners. So I think it's quite interesting, or as they refer to in the report, chief placemakers. I think there's probably a lot of people who would argue there are already a lot of chief planners out there, and probably Sarah, I would guess that you would fall into that category, or chief placemaker. So I guess is this something that we genuinely, it'd be interesting to see what the audience think. But Sue, if you want to kick off with that, maybe Sarah chip in.
Actually, you just beat me to the point I wanted to make. Planning has suffered massively during the years of austerity. Over the 10 years, 2008-9 up to 2017-18, there were enormous cuts ranging across the country, sort of up to 45-50% in some local authorities. The cuts were greater in terms of the policy side and the DM side. London and the South East got away a little bit more likely than some elsewhere in the country. But a key thing for the RTPI is to resource planning better. It actually makes financial sense, and there's work underway to actually look at the value that planners bring and try in some way capitalise that to get the message across a little more effectively. So watch this space for that coming forward. And the other one, as you mentioned, is planners at the top table. That's where we can actually bring everything together.
Yeah, and Sarah, do you concur with that as a chief planner? Do you see yourself as a chief?
I actually had to fill out an MHCLG survey in which they asked, "Is the chief planner at your top table?" And I said yes. So I think I count on that. I'm interested, if we got one more poll, I'm interested in doing it. I can probably talk over the poll if I don't know if that's something, but
yeah, I've lost the poll function. Lucy, can you do it?
Yeah, I was going to say that one of the helpful things that I can bring, and that we have discussions at the top table or management level, senior management level, is that within local government, people, my colleagues who are not in planning do get the relationship between strategic planning and development management and economic development and social development. They do understand, and they see that very straightforwardly in things like business rates, but they also understand it in things like Section 106 agreements, but generally understand that we need to have enough schools for people to go to school. We need to have enough homes for people to be housed. And so the link in local government is very strong. But it doesn't mean that we're not under a lot of financial pressures all the time and having to make difficult decisions across all council services.
Great. I saw the poll, but I'm trying to find it. Yes, 75% of people think that we should be having more chief planners. 16% think we already have them. That's interesting to know. And Coby, last question for you. How do we compare to Australia? Do you think we do design better here than over there?
Oh, that's a bit rough to ask. Well, I mean, I'm Australian, so I'd say Australia does it better. But no, I think they're very different planning frameworks, which I think has a very different outcome. Sydney has a different planning system to what Brisbane does. There's no sort of Australia-wide approach. I think that's a really big positive that the UK has going for it. You have the NPPF right at the top, which sets the standard, whereas in Australia, I think, infrastructure, it's not as coordinated as what you'd hope. I know it's a lot bigger, but that results in a lot of different planning outcomes. So in Sydney, you have a zoning planning system, whereas in Brisbane, it's a bit more objective and subjective. So it's a bit more, principles based, like the UK. So personally, I mean, I said this before to a number of my colleagues, I think somewhere in between is quite good. If we're not within the standards that we've set, at least we can justify what the principles are. So I'll sit on the fence, and I think that somewhere in between is actually a good outcome, just from my experience.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Okay, well, I think we're out of time now. I think hopefully once we can get back in, face-to-face proximity, it would be good to do this again, in a more of a round table thing. I think it's really interesting. With however many recommendations, things over 100 recommendations, we could probably speak for years on actually each of these components. But thanks to you all for joining and getting through the technical glitches that we've had, and hopefully have some more lessons learned. I think thanks to all the audience for actually contributing. I think we're going to try and work out a way that we can get a better kind of interactive chat function going, because I think there's a bit of an issue. I'm sure there must be a way with this software that you can do it, and we'll try and work that out better. Sue, as it's your presidential visit, I don't know whether you wanted to kind of have the last words. You're going to be doing a few more events for us over the next few days, but perhaps if you wanted to sum up, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
I think the summary really is to say thank you again to the speakers. Thank you to everyone who took part in the polls, because I think there's some really interesting messages that came through that and things that we can take away from this session. I found it really interesting, especially not being from London. It's given me a much, really good insight into a different way of looking at some of the things and a different approach. So I found it really interesting, and I've never done a virtual visit before. Really enjoying it, and I hope that people will join us as we go on. I think we've got a social event this evening, which will be the first online social event. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't supply drinks for that like we usually would, but everyone's welcome to join. I think it's at 5 o'clock. We'll be supplying our own drinks. I'm going to have a few, I think, after this. Okay, thanks to all your for you all, and thanks for sharing. We'll try and get some of the what people have been saying up online, and we'll also try and share the video of this event with people if that's helpful. Okay, see you all soon. Thanks, bye.